Welcome everybody to the second session of Esports Ed, the former Bytespeed podcast, now once a month esports webinar, focused on kind of giving you the real nuts and bolts behind actually running college and high school programs and some of the different how-tos and best practices from your peers in the industry. So tonight, our webinar is going to be focused on how to run effective practices and tryouts, something that I'm sure most of you attending tonight are just about to do, or maybe have just done, or maybe, you know, it's something that you need to kind of get some inspiration for as the fall semester kicks off here. So I'm going to share my screen here, and we're going to get running with the presentation for this evening. One note about the PowerPoint, it is pretty bare bones, and that is by design. We want this to be super interactive, you know, questions pulled from the chat and the Q&A function. So if you have any of those that pop up during this evening, please feel free to submit those. There's a Q&A session at the end, and we'll also try and answer them as they come in. But we want this to be a back and forth. We want it to be a dialogue and a lot of, you know, firsthand experience being shared tonight. So the PowerPoint is an outline, and the majority of what will really be talked about is going to come from our panelists tonight. So, and speaking of them, we'll just do some quick introductions. My name is Josh Knutson. I'm the Esports and Virtual Reality Solutions Director here at Bytespeed. We're an IT manufacturing company based in Moorhead, Minnesota. Big footprint in esports as a company. It's been a big focus of ours over the last 4 or 5 years. And kind of we're trying to promote resources to, you know, high schools and colleges like those that are attending to be able to help the community grow. So that's kind of where Esports Ed was kind of born out of, and why we're here tonight. I myself am a former college coach. I started back in 2016 at the University of Jamestown, started and ran that program until May of 2019 when I joined the team here at Bytespeed, and then have been doing my current role here. So with that, I'm going to bounce it to the panel, starting off with Chaylin Kalick from Tiffin University. How about you introduce yourself and kind of tell us about where you started with esports and what you're doing now?
Absolutely. Thanks, Josh. As he said, my name is Chaylin Kalick. I'm the head coach for Tiffin University's esports program. I started off playing esports probably at the age of 10 in Halo 2 tournaments back in the day with MLG. So definitely maybe dates myself a little bit there, but I was the founder of Tiffin University's program. We were the first varsity esports program in the state of Ohio for the collegiate side, and then we were one of the first 10 in the country. We currently have a 4,000 square foot arena, 20 plus computers, and we have about 50 students on our roster. We currently compete in League of Legends, Counter-Strike, Overwatch, and Rocket League. And then I also serve as an esports advisor on the Esports Ohio board as well. So having a hand in the upbringing of both college and high school esports has definitely been a blessing.
Awesome. Thanks for being here. We'll bounce it to our other Ohio representative tonight, Gavin Yoder from Lake High School.
I'm from Lake, and I've participated on Esports Ohio through their tournaments. Last year we did Overwatch. I was just a DPS guy for them and just helped in general because it was our first year doing any sort of esports program. I just helped. It was a group effort from 5 or so students and 2 different teachers to organize a group. And so I helped kind of put together practices and once a week. And I'm also a marketing advisor for a Valorant esports team. They're just kind of based all over the U.S., as well as I helped with a little bit of commentary for Esports Ohio with their Overwatch quarantine tournament and participated in the Valorant tournament.
Awesome. Next up, Allie Vandermeide from Iowa.
Hi, I'm Allie Vandermeide, and I'm about to date myself even more. I got into esports in StarCraft, the original. Yeah, I remember waking up at 1 or 2 a.m. to watch those because they're from South Korea. I am the president of the IAHSEA, just letting you know, because IAHSEA is Illinois. all those I states in a row. It's just a whole bunch of fun. I'm the president and founder of that. We run our first year last year. We're in our second year this year, officially running seasons. We've been around for about 2 years now. And I'm the director of esports at Davenport Central High School. We have an arena. I don't know what our square footage is, but we have this space to have 17 computers socially distanced from each other, even though we currently can't be in the arena. We're not allowed in the school yet, which is why I'm at home. Yeah, and so we run Smash Brothers, CSGO, Overwatch, Rocket League, Rainbow Six Siege, and we're hoping to have a League of Legends team this year, but it kind of depends on how other things work out.
Awesome. And finally, Brad Rogers from South Carolina.
So yeah, I'm going to represent the South apparently for the esports stuff. So basically, I originally was a player on our esports team here at USC Sumter. I've kind of been around since we first started the whole program here and whatnot, and actually assisted in a lot of various ways. And then again, I was a player for a very long time for Overwatch and Heroes of the Storm and occasionally Hearthstone, occasionally. And since then, since I graduated, I've been assisting with the actual coaching of the program for, again, Overwatch, Heroes of the Storm, Paladins. Depends on really kind of what we're doing that semester. But as far as games go, we play CSGO, Overwatch, Hearthstone. We did used to have Heroes of the Storm, not anymore. Rocket League, Smash, Madden, Call of Duty. We pretty much like to try everything because, you know, if there's people there who are willing to play it and it's a collegiate esport, we're pretty, you know, active in whatever we can put our hands on, really. So
Awesome. Well, thanks to the four of you for volunteering to be on the panel this evening. It's great to have a big, widespread of experience from both the high school and the college level. And we're going to talk about some really key factors and how to run those types of practices tonight. So the topics, we'll split this up kind of 50-50 into some different practices and how you actually set up policies and routines and things like that for your actual practices. And then we'll talk about how to navigate tryouts, especially because that's something that I'm sure a lot of teams will be going through or have already kind of navigated this fall and moving into the spring as well. So those are kind of our two main topics. Again, this is going to be very back and forth. We want questions from the audience, so please feel free to submit those and we'll kind of move along and get, you know, the feedback and different viewpoints from all four of our panelists today. And like I said before, there will be a Q&A session at the end for any questions that we don't get to in the middle of the presentation. So with that, I think we can dive right in and let's talk about practices and setting up team policies. Before we can even get into how to actually, run a practice, a lot of programs will set parameters as far as things like academic eligibility, what the rules are for their clubs or teams overall. And I'd love to start here and kind of go through each one of our panelists tonight, maybe starting with Allie, and talk about kind of how you guys have set up the program at Davenport and the different governing structures that you have in place to make sure that your team is following the right path in practice and during the seasons.
So one thing that's really helpful in Davenport is that I have a really close relationship with our activities department. One of the things that is greatly to our benefit is because I'm the esports director, it's kind of like I'm kind of the equivalent, if you want to think very traditionally, of the athletic director. So one of my tasks is to run eligibility reports every Friday for our students. We try to keep it rolling as frequently as possible when it comes to academic eligibility. So I run them every Friday, but as soon as you're back to passing, you can now play again, which helps keep those kids want to stay involved and get together, which is really good. For structure, I have a couple of coaches underneath me, so I'm not just the coach. I do coach several of the games, but not all of them, which is really nice. So our structure is a little bit more defined, I think, than a lot of schools that are walking into this. But it's really helpful for me because I don't have to be an expert in League of Legends because I'm not good at it at all. I can have somebody else come in and help me with that.
Sure.
So I don't know, structure wise, we got going and then we've kind of grown into kind of the massive size that we are now.
Sure. You know, can you talk a little bit more about that academic eligibility and when you do grade checks? Are you looking for a specific GPA point? Is it number of classes being passed? How do you navigate kind of that? What is eligible and was not eligible?
I'm exclusively looking for failing grades. One of the things that's kind of a big deal in our selling point to our administration was getting students involved who are not involved in anything else, and getting them to be a positive proponent for their school. For a lot of these students, they're not involved in traditional sports or activities because of their grades. And so we have a really powerful tutoring program at our school. So if they're failing a single class, they have to go to tutoring and not practice that night. And I have found that because we let them right back on as quickly as they're passing, students are like that. Kind of immediate gratification is a really good motivator for a lot of students.
Awesome.
But it's not a specific GPA, it's just they can't be failing anything.
Sure. Does that limit participation in practice, or is that just games, or what's the split there?
It limits participation in practice and games. So if a student who is failing classes on our varsity team, they feel it. And the rest of the team knows it and gets on their case as well.
Awesome. Gavin, from a student's perspective, does your club or team have any of those requirements? How does that impact your day-to-day when you're in the school and actually being a student?
Overall, Lake just has a policy of D's or F's. You can't participate in clubs. That's at least my understanding of it. I know other different extracurricular activities that I'm involved in. They have the same policy of D's and F's. You can't participate. Ski club, Model UN, Esports, same policy. It's just a flat line. It's not specifically up to the director of the club. It's more kind of your guidance counselors checking in on you, making sure, hey, you're falling behind. Is this something with you, or are you just struggling with the class?
Sure. Has that been a big motivating factor for yourself and your peers? You know, has it changed the way you go about being a student?
Honestly, not really. I've always just been kind of pushing towards college, and I found that since we have a smaller, tight-knit group, I mean, honestly, the 5 people that we had last year, 6 people, all of us knew each other really well. We were all a really close group of friends, and the teachers that helped join it and bring it together to Esports Ohio all helped perpetuate just a team group experience where we wouldn't want someone to be left out. So it wasn't even a case of someone falling behind. It was, we all had classes together, so we'd be helping each other outside of it. It wasn't esports bringing us together. It was just us as a community, a group.
Sure. Let's flip to the college side of things. Jalen, do you want to talk about kind of what you guys have at Tiffin and how eligibility plays a factor with you guys?
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously with us being non-traditional, us and stunt are the 2 sports on our campus that are not NCAA affiliated. So that definitely plays a role in the collegiate scene. So we have essentially just strict guidelines across the university. So the way that we operate things within the esports program is very similar to what Ali brought up with tutoring. We have the Murphy Academic Center, and that allows us to have what we call study table hours. And those study table hours vary based upon the student's GPA. So if they drop below a 2.5 cumulative, we will have them attend study table hours. And then if they drop below a 2.0, they won't be eligible to practice or compete until it gets above that. And the study table hours can be done simply by doing homework. They can go see a tutor or whatever, and they need to be done and completed that week. We do grade checks every 2 weeks, and that's where the students will just come in. We have a graduate assistant that they meet up with. They show them their grades, give them a check. Everything's good. You're good to go. If they don't have study table hours, then they're all set. If they do, they need to get them done before next week's practice. We have noticed too that similar to what Ali said, that allowing the team to kind of self-police themselves usually works out pretty well. So what we'll do is, if a student, say, has 2 hours of study table and they only did an hour and a half, and they didn't get it done the next week, the entire team will then go together and do 30 minutes each person collectively as a unit. And that allows them that cohesion, that teamwork, and then it also makes sure it doesn't happen again, because students feel, I shouldn't have to be here because my grades are good, so I'm going to figure it out, whether it's helping the person or whatever. So that's kind of the route that we take with it. Obviously, we're very oriented, and we treat ourselves just like any other sport on campus. We are a varsity athletic program, and we pride ourselves in that. And we don't want to take any shortcuts or allow our students to feel that they're treated any differently than any other sport on campus.
Awesome. And, finally, Brad, do you want to kind of touch on what USC Sumter does? Is it similar to what, Chalon is doing over at Tiffin?
I would say, yeah, like it's pretty accurate. Again, we, at this point in time, the program here has existed for about 5 years. So we've tried a lot of different approaches, and, certain approaches like don't work from our experience, some do, but I would say that, as far as it goes, we have a very similar setup to how Shaylin just described, actually. So it's pretty close to that. Like especially like study hall hours. Originally, we would set to where students had to spend about 12 hours doing study hall and had to do, throughout the whole week. And then that was kind of like their set time to do it and so on. And we kind of laxed up on that and kind of more took different approaches, basically. And, I think a lot of it really depends on the group that comes in. I think throughout our program's history, we've been through hundreds of players who've, come in, they've graduated, because we're a 2-year school. So a lot of our players, they spend 2 years here, then, move on and so on. So I think a lot of it depends on the student, but as far as academic eligibility goes, yeah, it's not too far from what Chalon described. So
awesome. We did have 2 questions come in, and I think I think have covered what Carl was asking. He said, at my university, all athletes in traditional sports are required to spend a certain amount of time studying each week. Sounds like between study tables or other, team practices, that's something that seems pretty common. I know when I was in charge of the program at UJ, we had 1 day a week that was just study hall, and there was no practice. So, I think we touched on that. One question from Charlie, what do you guys do when the minimum number of players for a team is impacted by eligibility? For example, if you have 6 players for Overwatch and I have to bench one due to grades and the team can't play at all, I've been weary of excessive consequences for this reason, but I found that it really impacts morale and conduct. I'll just kind of open up the floor if any of you want to kind of tackle that question.
From a high school perspective, I don't run if I have the minimum number of people. 6 is not enough for me to sign up an Overwatch team. I have to have at least 8, just because I want to be able to be too deep. And it's not just for academic reasons. It's also kids get sick. What happens if a kid is out sick that day and we have a game? We're not skipping it. So just making sure that we at least have a couple of extras. For us, we have both varsity and JV. So at any moment I can bring up a JV kid. We also have community teams that run underneath it. So if the JV team needs people, I'll just yank a community kid for that day.
Sure.
But I would not run a team with just the minimum number of people.
Awesome. Anybody else want to touch on that one?
From another high school perspective, our school operates always at near minimum. We had 6 kids last year, with someone who was kind of off and on, like not really fully wanting to commit to joining the team as a sub. So we just had to run. We wanted to be there. We had our first year, and it was just trying to get it up and rolling. And sometimes you have to scrape along like that. And if it's because of conduct, that makes sense that they couldn't play, because it could affect they're not allowed on school property or whatever. But when it comes to grades, that's when sometimes for games you have to make that sacrifice if you want to keep the club rolling as a functional group, looking good to administrators to get funding. I mean, it's our second year and we got funding to build on the fact that 6 PCs, I think, for our school. And if we would have had to miss our one game that we did get last year, thanks to Corona, that would have been a pretty big issue.
I think it's a balancing act, that, you know, the values of your program have to be, you know, clearly spelt out. You know, if academics are a large focus, and I know they are for a lot of programs, sometimes it is a hard decision as a coach to say that we have to, you know, forfeit this game because academics come first. We had to do that when I was at Jamestown. I had to bench a kid where we didn't have a full starting 5. And that kind of puts the onus on that player to, you know, have that motivating factor of, oh my gosh, I can't let my team down again. I have to get my grades up. And I think, you know, while that may be a negative impact for, you know, that singular hour of when the game happens, for the long-term health of the program and the values of the program that you're trying to build, sometimes those small sacrifices in the beginning create a culture of, you know, accountability moving forward that is really important. So, you know, that's something that as a director and as a coach, sometimes you will have to make a hard decision. And, you know, nobody likes to forfeit games, but if academics are going to be a priority for your program, sometimes you have to stick to that. And, you know, over the long term of your program, that will probably be, you know, decisions that you'll look back on down the road and say, yes, that was the right call, even though it was a hard decision to make.
I'll just weigh in. I know we've actually had something similar happen when I played college tennis here at Tiffin. And it's something that I recommend to high schools, which is, you know, let's assume you have 5 people for Overwatch and you're playing against a school. Basically what you do is you concede the match and you allow the other team to win, but you ask them if you could just have one of their JV kids, and then you play that 6-on-6 with the understanding that even if you win, the other team still gets credit for the win. That allows everyone to still compete, still allows you to get that experience, still shows the administration that you have 5 people that are willing to play, doesn't make you play a man down, because, you know, to get Evan's credit, there are a lot of schools that are struggling for administration to understand that esports is very legitimate. It's very real. You know, my home high school of Port Clinton, I've been working with them very hard to try and have them make a team. And some people just are still stuck on the idea of kids playing video games. So it can be tough to, you know, like forfeit that match and have them, you know, say, oh, look, we were right. You guys can't even have a match on a day. So that's definitely a route that I would always recommend, that if you can, you know, play the match however possible. You know, I never encourage, if a student is not eligible or shouldn't play, keep them out. You know, that has to happen. But communicate with the other team, because odds are you're going to play a school that has 1 or 2 subs. Maybe there's a Discord you're in. Hey, can a random person play for us just for the day? We're going to lose even if we win, but it gives everybody experience and playtime.
Kind of moving on from academic eligibility, let's talk about facility policies for practice. You know, device access, facility access for the college teams. You know, when do you allow players to come in? How do you navigate scheduling when you have multiple teams that need to practice in a day? You know, this is definitely going to be something where we'll want both high school and college perspective, because high school has a lot less time available. So, you know, we'll get both sides of the coin here, because sometimes that facility access and those policies set in place are hurdles that we have to overcome. So let's start maybe with Brad. You know, for you guys at USCS, can you talk about how you scheduled out practices and kind of what policies you put in place for the facility?
So for the most part, because we aren't a 24-hour campus, but I mean, I know me and the director here are pretty open to leaving the actual room itself open from anywhere between 7 o'clock in the morning to 10 o'clock at night, depending on the day and so on. So we try to make sure that our players can come into the room, of course, minus COVID. We try to make sure that access is there and that they can practice, because not every student is going to have the equipment they need at home. So like if they don't have that set up and whatnot, we definitely want them to be able to come in. during practice and stuff like that, I mean, we definitely have policies in place where, you know, say for example, we during matches or practice or etc., no phones. Like, you know, you leave it at the door. Like we have a bin that you literally put all your stuff in so you don't have that distraction. Because I mean, let's be honest, if you're on your phone, it's just like at a job or whatnot ever, it's like if you're on it the whole time, you're probably not entirely focused on the mission and what you have to do and getting, you know, the best performance that you could have. And you just got to eliminate all those distractions and so on. And like I said, we try our best to make that kind of environment where you're really going to grow as a player. I mean, we've had individuals who started as bronze in Overwatch, for example, and got all the way up to like 50 points for master, or sometimes even master. So to me, it's kind of like that dedication and understanding what you need to do and like what, you know, like how you should treat yourself or treat the stations and so on. It's like you just gotta take responsibility in a sense. So
Sure. Jalen, what do you guys do at Tiffin? I know you guys have a standalone, beautiful facility. Kind of what's in place for you guys?
Definitely, and I agree with Bradley. I think you know, there are some schools that have the facility open 24 hours a day, and you know, I'll just be honest. I mean, I think, you know, aside from Gavin, I think most of us remember our college days, and we know that if we were given the opportunity to sit inside and play video games 24 hours a day, we would probably have done it, and that would have been a poor decision. And I think we have to, as coaches, realize that sometimes you have to protect them from themselves. So, you know, we currently have our arena open usually from like 11 to 8. There are specific circumstances where those times do change, but for the most part, those are our set hours. Now, there are some times when I will trust my captains to keep it open for just their team, but for the most part, it's either myself, 2 of my coaches on my staff, or my graduate assistant in the building at all times. Like I said, I do have a captain for each individual team that I will trust with overseeing things, because their teams do respect them and wouldn't want, you know, them to get in trouble if something were to happen. But you know, and we will open it up if there's you know, a League of Legends World Finals in China and the match happens at 3 a.m. We'll open the arena so everybody can come watch it. But you know, there's no reason for a student to be playing games at 3 a.m. when you have a class at 8 a.m. Right? So we do regulate that, and we are pretty strict on that. As far as devices, obviously we provide everything for them. If students want to bring their own, that's totally cool. We fully support that. Any software that they need in terms of you know, DPI changes, stuff like that, we totally support. But for the most part, you know, everything we have, obviously all our computers are top of the line. You know, 1080's the works, and all of our monitors, you know, 140 hertz, they're great monitors. So if you really want to bring your own, sure. Obviously, I know Allie's gonna know what I'm talking about when I say I got Counter-Strike kids that play in like, you know, 1910, and they're just not utilizing a nice monitor for what it is, but that's fine. So yeah, we provide everything. They're totally cool to bring their own. But we want to make sure that they're out being a college kid. You know, those some of the best years of your life. You don't need to just waste it completely grinding away on esports. You know, go out there, experience things. I appreciate the hustle, but be a college kid.
Sure. Allie, let's talk about juggling practice schedules with a lot of kids and not a lot of time. You know, for a high school student, you know, you have school from 8 until 3:30, let's just say straight. It's not as flexible as a college schedule. That leaves a very small window of time for practice. So can you kind of talk about what Davenport does and kind of the different policies that you have in place to make sure that all your kids are getting access in the way that you have set in stone?
Yeah, so one of the things that I really pushed for the Iowa High School Esports Association was seasoned games. So we play 6 games right now, but we do not play them all at the same time. This is both for the health of the students and the coaches. We have to think a lot about like our small Iowa schools where there's only one person doing everything. There's no way that they can do everything. So our biggest season only has 3 games in it. So prior to the season, my coaches and I sit down almost Rain Man style with a whiteboard and Post-it notes and figure out each day of the week who gets to practice at what computer. and kind of count out seats and make sure we've got everybody kind of out for our official practices that happen after school. So competition nights, depending on when they are, they obviously get first priority to the computers because my students do not, like, we're very high, we have a very high number of students who are free and reduced lunch, so they do not have the equipment at home, so they have to practice on campus. So competition nights, those computers go to those people, and then after that, we kind of divvy it up for who's, okay, so these guys are competing tonight, so who's practicing tonight, and who's got the Smash Station or the Switch, if we've got like a Splatoon match or something going on over in the corner with a community game. And so it's a lot of Post-it notes, and it's a couple of days of kind of crazy, but once it's all worked out, it does work pretty smoothly. And we have, I kind of touched on this a little bit. We have kind of 3 divisions of play. We have varsity, JV, and then community. And so there is kind of a difference between, especially running practices. Like a varsity practice looks very different than like a community practice. Because to be real honest, I'll set the community kids up at the computers and then walk away. They can kind of do like, you can do whatever you want, play, practice, because most of the community kids, they just want to learn how to play the game. So they just need to like poke around on a computer. But otherwise, the varsity practices are very structured, very in order. We have specific things that we want to go through for that night. And we do that. And like you said, we don't have a lot of time, so we have to be very structured.
Sure.
And then I have a para who comes in. So the library assistant person who comes in early in the morning, and we like to call it weight room. And so the computer lab is just open for an hour before school starts with not a lot of oversight. So if somebody just wants to come in and work on something, they can.
Gotcha. Awesome. Let's jump to the next one, and we'll start with Gavin here. Toxicity guidelines is something that the advisory group for esports ed wanted to make sure that we covered because, you know, esports practices, you know, we want things to be very focused, very productive. We want to have the right mindset. Gavin, do you want to talk a little bit about kind of, does your school have any guidelines as far as, you know, appropriate behavior, you know, what your toxicity guidelines, for lack of a better word, do you guys focus at all on that, or kind of, do you have anything that's put in place?
As our school goes, we don't have any guidelines other than just keep it school appropriate, and when administration is around, keep it clean, keep it friendly. Because like Challen had said, we struggle with those people who still don't think of kids sitting at computers as esports. They think of it as just a hobby that a kid likes to enjoy. And as someone with a lot of hours on Counter-Strike, I can tell you there's a lot of toxicity out there. There's a lot of bad things out there. And in my opinion, it has no place to an extent in esports, because there always should be some level of community, just fun poking at each other. You need that in order to keep competition alive, and you can't just have 6 people deadpan at computers not saying anything other than call-outs. That's not interesting for spectators, and that's not exciting to watch, and that doesn't make it seem like a sport. Sports will have people cheering and booing, and you need to have that to some extent. And I mean, last year in the Valorant tournament, I got called out a little bit for teabagging, because just as an ex-Counter-Strike player, that's just what happens. That's just kind of your go-to gut reaction, and that's not something they take in Esports Ohio. That's not something they do. So I didn't get pulled out of a tournament or anything. I just got told by Nick, who's should be watching this. I just got told, hey, back off. And usually that's what it comes down to, because it's just out of respect for one another. Just stop. And that's all it takes.
And any of you other three want to jump in with, do you have concrete rules for, you know, appropriateness or, you know, how you go about in-game toxicity or behavior?
So actually, toxicity, yeah. I was about to say, everybody here, we've been gaming for a while, so it's like, you know, you see it in multiplayer chat and so on and so forth. With our program, we're pretty no nonsense about toxicity, just because we have a very diverse team, and like who comes from all walks of life and whatnot, whether out of state or in state or so on and so forth. So one of the big things, especially to me, is like I think you should always have an air of like, not necessarily like hardcore professionalism, but I do think that like if you're going into a competition, you should treat it like, again, since like I view esports as serious as the usual regular athletics, traditional sports. So to me, it's like when you go on a field, because like I played rugby and I played football and baseball. So when I played rugby, it was always the gentleman's sport. So it's like when you go into a match, sure, it's okay to poke fun and be a little competitive for sure, but like name calling stuff like that as far as our team is concerned, is unacceptable. I mean, we had a player who was being toxic in chat one day to an opposing team in a match, and like we pretty much pulled him out and subbed in one of our other players because it was just like, absolutely not, you can't do that. Like this is we need to treat ourselves as professionals, and like we need to act in the best way possible, and like whether we win or lose, at the end of the day, we're all playing the same game and we all enjoy the same games, and just treat people like people is kind of how like I think we look at it. So
Yeah, I mean, we have a very similar viewpoint. I think pretty much everyone will agree that you definitely have to have thick skin when it comes to competing, especially in solo queue. Now, as far as practice goes and everything, our team razzes each other, and I think you have to. I think if you want to be a close team, you got to be able to dish it out and take it. But as far as competitions go, we're very much so no nonsense, because people need to understand that one, you're going to get a reputation, and nobody wants to be known as the team that is the jerks, the people that say stuff that don't need to be said, that have that reputation as the bad guys. Nobody wants to be known as that. And I also really urge any high school people that are listening, it's not fair, but you will be held to a higher standard than any other sport at your school. And that's because, once again, you play video games, you're doing something that's revolutionary, and sometimes people don't take it seriously. And you will be held to a higher standard, because the minute that you make a mistake, it's going to be those darn video games. Look at it. This doesn't have a place. We need to get rid of it. And you have to hold yourself to a higher standard. And if that's, sometimes acting like a saint, maybe even more so than you realistically want to, I mean, so be it. Sometimes that's what it takes.
Allie, anything you want to add here, or should we jump to the next one?
Just really quickly, I have two things. One, so we basically have two rules, and they mostly revolve around language. Rule number one is the blue shell rule. The only time that it's appropriate to curse in practice is when you've been hit by a blue shell, which is a reference from Mario Kart. So each sport, like each title, has their own blue shell moment defined. And then two, if you do curse and it's not a blue shell moment, we have a poster on the wall that says words we can say other than the F word, and it's actually written out, and they have to put up a word up there instead, and it's filled with hilarious things. So it's just kind of like, I have found, especially with like high school kids, you have to make it funny. If you just yell at them for language, it's not going to work. If you just like punish them for language, it's not going to work. Give them something else to say, and especially if they come up with it themselves, it works a lot better.
Sure. Awesome. And I would love to cover any other policies and things like that, but we are running long just kind of in this section. So I think we're going to jump forward. Lots of great info. Thank you all for sharing on these things, but let's actually dive into the structure of a practice and kind of what you each do to run an effective, week of practices, a semester of practices, what have you. I want to cover expectations and how each of you set your expectations for your teams or your coaches, Gavin as being a player and a student. What's the back and forth like? And let's start with Allie. As a director, can you talk about the expectations that you have for your coaches, for your players, about what you want to happen during practice? You talked about being very focused and setting a tone. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Sure. So for varsity practices, I'll kind of stick with them for the most part. For varsity practices, we are very specific about what exactly it is we're doing that night, and the students know what it is we're doing that night. And we're very, I have found that students need to be more reflective about what happens. So they'll go into a competitive match, just using kind of Overwatch as our biggest example. They'll go into a competitive match and then come out, and then I have them turn all of their chairs around from their computer, and then we talk about it. And we talk about what went right, what went wrong, what we should have done next time, how we can do that next time. And then we turn back around and we do it again. And just kind of setting that like in and out and in and out for a practice works really well for varsity. We also record a fair chunk of our matches, even if they're just practice matches. So that way we can rewatch the video if we need to, especially during that conversation. Sometimes it's really handy to be like, what happened here? You know, why were you out of position here? Or where should you have been here? Really helps focus the conversation. But that's varsity. You know, if you're looking, like I said earlier about community teams, I kind of just walk away and let them do their thing. And JV is also a little bit more flexible. So you just have to be at the right level with the student. Because if I tried to do that amount of practice with my community kids, I would not have any community team left. So just make sure that you've got the right kind of focus and pressure on the students is what they signed up for.
Sure. Setting that expectation early and clearly so that they know what they're in for on any given day.
Yeah, and I've found that, you know, if you set that high pressure and the kids know that they're signed up for it, you'll actually get those kids who want that. They're like, okay, so everybody else is going to be playing at this level. That'll be a lot better.
Sure. Gavin, as a player, you know, what type of expectations do you have? What kind of goals do you have that you want to accomplish during a specific practice that kind of relate back to yourself or your coach?
As someone who does a lot of Valorant and Overwatch, that's just the games that I play. I do a lot of aim labs practice. It's a great free option that a lot of people will recommend Kovacs for aim training. I find just getting on aim labs, sitting on it for about an hour a day, personally, that's what helps me as a player strengthen myself. But it comes to a lot about making sure you're up on game sense. It's great to know positioning and stuff, and that is an amazing thing to do as a team, is to go over positioning and record your plays and go over that. But when it comes to basic game sense, you have to make sure everyone's on the same playing field, and keeping up with community content is very good. It's something that you can't really teach without having a whole class dedicated to an esports, and that's not going to happen. That's out of all of our ranges, I would say. And it just comes from each player, is what I've seen for the most part personally, is it comes from each player, that team aspect. You have to get to know each other as players and know each other's weaknesses. And if that takes sitting down after every match, like Ali said, then you need to do that. And it should be on a bit of a team by team basis. There's sadly no one solution for all teams, but that method of recording matches, it's very effective. We had one team last year. It wasn't my school, it was a different school. They played, I hate to say it, but like a bunch of bronzes in an Overwatch tournament, and the next day they absolutely stomped, because they went back, they looked at their gameplay, and they studied. It was a tournament game even, and they flipped their entire team around. It takes that ability to look at what's wrong, who's doing what wrong, and why, and being able to change that and develop yourself into better players. You can't go into matches looking for wins. You have to go in looking to improve yourself and look for faults in yourself, because not everyone's a top 500 player.
Sure. Chaylin, Brad, I'd love to know kind of as far as routines and things that you have your players do every day, different things that you focus on each week. Can you talk about kind of that aspect of practices, things that you know your players are going to do every day, and kind of just go through the set in stone pieces of a practice that you know can be repeated?
I think depending on the game, you know, it's always going to be a little different. But for the most part, we do kind of have like a general structure going into practice where it's like, you know, maybe 30 minutes of warm up. I'll just use Overwatch as an example, since that's the one I know best. With Overwatch, it's like 30 minutes of warm up, whether that's through quick plays, or like going into the practice range, you know, just kind of like obviously getting kind of limbered up, ready to go to actually get into comp or something like that. Generally, we expect our players to have an idea of something they want to improve on, or maybe the week prior, like say we had a match and we struggled against a particular strategy, then we kind of need to figure out like how can we overcome that. So this coming up week during our practices, we try to focus on that. So like after the warm up period and whatnot, depending on the semester and how big the teams are, there's times where we've had 3 Overwatch teams like fully equipped. So, you know, we can have them compete or fight against each other, either mixing the teams up or having it, no kidding, like team 1 versus team 2 or team 1 versus team 3, so on and so forth, to kind of like practice like, okay, what was really causing us trouble in our previous match and so on. And like, generally we'll take footage from either the matches and so on, like, and we'll go and do VODs. Like we have a room right next to our arena where we have a big projector screen and everything like that. So we'll put the game up right there on the projector screen, and generally I'll be the one who kind of like leads the VOD review, and I go through, we sit the whole team down and like say, all right, we can look and see where this went wrong, and so on. And kind of like what Gavin was saying, it shows that like the players where they messed up, or like where they could have done better, or where they did great, or like, you know, what really kind of, oh, this big play here is what won us the round, and so on and so forth. So and I found like doing VODs, especially for a decent chunk of practice, is really good. Like I think it's very beneficial to players, and the actual skill mechanic, like the physical mechanics of it, I almost feel like they should train that on their time. And then again, when they come in, they're ready to play with the team and so on. And again, do VOD reviews and analysis of plays and team compositions and so on. So
Mine's pretty short. I mean, I'm a pretty rigorous note taker. When I watch our team practice or scrim, I usually have a legal pad that I just blaze through with notes. And then after each game, we sit down 5 minutes, 10 minutes, go through everything, and then go from there. Obviously, it depends on the game. Our Rocket League team, they really push some of the practice maps and such that you can get online, the different packs. And then, you know, as Gavin pointed out, some of the aim bots for both Valorant and CSGO to practice those are all pretty important. But as far as routine go, I mean, you know, it's up to the coach, you know, what you find your team's going to respond best to.
Sure. One of the things that I had for our college team at UJ, we started every practice with a team meeting where we had everybody in the program for 5 or 10 minutes, just going over the day's plan, the expectation for the day, and, you know, highlighting those key features that we were going to focus practice around, kind of like Brad said. And we also threw into our daily routine that happened every single day at the beginning of practice. After that team meeting was over, I had them all stretch for 10 minutes as a team every single day. We went through, you know, hands, arms, wrists, elbows, shoulders, kind of the whole upper body, just to be able to loosen up. And another thing that we could do all as a team, a lot of the times physicality and some of that is left out of practices. There are some college teams and some high school teams that have their players in the weight room. And, you know, that is a great aspect of running a holistic program. I didn't have my players in a weight room, but we stretched and did yoga at some points during practice, just to, you know, get a little bit of physicality into our practices, so that we weren't sitting at chairs and desks for 2 or 3 hours without doing anything. And just the camaraderie, you know, people will talk about their day, you know, when we're stretching and I'm walking around the room. And it was just, you know, one of those small little things that we did every single day that just kind of set the tone for what practice was going to be. And also it was a thing that we could all do together, which you don't often get with an esports program, because we're kind of like little mini athletic departments, where a Rocket League practice is going to look very different than a League of Legends practice. But those common experiences that you can have across the board with all of your players at the same time are really great things to help unify a whole program, even though it might be different teams within your school, often doing their own things during practice.
I will actually agree with that, by the way. Like our program, that's something I failed to mention, is we kind of we want to add that physical aspect of like whether it's we go over to our gym and like do just light workouts or something like that, because again, it brings the whole team together. It's like a group effort and so on. Or even if we have specific events that we make our whole team be a part of, just so it's like you have that group bonding going on. So yeah.
Absolutely. We kind of touched a little bit on the different drills that are out there. So I want to kind of skip that section and talk a little bit more about scrimmages. With esports programs, this is probably one of the better ways of getting, good quality practice out there. Jalen, you just came from a scrimmage. Do you want to kind of go through that process of how you set that up and take us through kind of what that looks like during an actual day?
Yeah, definitely. I think scrims are super important. They're so much better than having your team solo queue. It's such an RNG opportunity when you solo queue. You never know who you're going to get, if they're going to take the game seriously. Maybe you're not going to get the strategy you want to pull off. So I think scrimmages are just bar none the most important thing for students to be focusing on in their programs. Luckily enough, we are in a conference that I created with schools of our size in our area called the GLEC, the Great Lakes Esports Conference. And it just has a great collection of schools. Everybody works together to make the league better, and you can always get scrims in it, which is great. And so, we set a scrim up, and it's nice to be able to talk with their coach and say, hey, we're scrimming league tonight. Don't ban this and this. We want to practice this comp, right? And obviously don't abuse the fact that we're going to play it because I'm telling you we're going to play it, right? Like don't just hard pick a counter and make it awful. But, you're trying to set up a couple comps for your team, see what works, what doesn't. And it's been great. I mean, scrimming with other schools is it makes everything better. And I've told people pre-COVID, we're going to have our finals all in person. And I think the thing that's most important about that, and I think Gavin will agree, is that when you're playing traditional sports, you see the other person, you compete against them. When you're both freshmen, you see them every year when you do home and homes, right? Oh man, they got this kid. He's the point guard. He's so good. Well, when you're playing in esports, a lot of times you just see a username. You don't know who that kid is. He could be 6'5", he could be 5'6", right? You have no idea what he looks like. But when you compete in person, you get to see them, right? You put a face to a name. So then when you had that play earlier in the season, you go, oh man, when we played each other, that play you made was sick. Like it allows you to get to know people. So as you scrim them, you're like, oh man, we got to scrim these guys. Like their support's so good. Like this is super annoying. Let's ban him or whatever. It gives you that personality trait that I don't think you always get if you just are playing solo queue and grinding that way.
Anybody else want to jump in and talk about kind of what they do for scrimmages or what that experience has been like?
I just really want to hop in really quick and say that I've had both good and bad experiences with scrimmages. You have to be really deliberate when you're setting them up, that everybody is aware that this is practice. We're not out to kill each other, because sometimes we've hopped into a scrimmage and it was toxic and bad. And it just ruined morale for several days for my students. Not because we lost, but just because it was just a bad scrim. So just make sure that you're keeping those lines of communication with the other coach open and everybody kind of understands why you're there.
That is one important thing that comes with scrims, is that you do have to not only check for toxicity and like have that clear sight line of, hey, let's keep this calm, but also you do have to keep in mind the skills of the different teams. Personally, we did an Overwatch scrim last year that we were a little bit under the other team's skill level, and it just had us in a bad mood because it was somehow this team of like all GMs was facing our team of like some golds and some bronzes, and it was not a good game by any means. It was horrible. We just got stomped, and no matter what we did, there was nothing we could have done because it was just the enemy team. They had a perfect team comp. They went on to get to the finals in that Overwatch tournament. They are an amazing team. And at first it was a very bad time for us because we were like, wow, this is sad. But then you are able to flip it around if you get in that mindset of looking for, like I said earlier, how to improve yourself. We looked at what they were doing right because we couldn't figure out what we were doing wrong. So we looked at what strategies they were using, what heroes they were picking. And sometimes you do have to be able to turn it around in that moment and say, hey, what are they doing right that we're not doing?
Yeah, I think it's there's a couple of different ways that you can go about setting up scrimmages, looking for teams that are similar skill level so that it is a competitive game. But then if you do have a little bit of a lopsided match where one team is significantly more skilled than the other, kind of taking that mindset of, okay, we're going to use this as a learning experience no matter the outcome, and not only looking at what we can do to get better, but also analyzing what the other team is doing to make those adjustments like Gavin was saying and say, okay, we want to emulate that. We're not there yet, but that's something that we want to push towards and get better and hopefully be at that level the next time we play them. Kaylin, it looks like, Chaylin, you want to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, in scrimmages, I've had the better team and I've had the worst team multiple times. And I think the big thing to note is that even if you are the better team, try out a comp you're not comfortable with, right? Something that you are just terrible at. Even though you are the better skilled team, you might find that, this is how you can slow the game down and see it from a different perspective. And then the opposite can be true, right? If you're playing a team that's completely has better than you overall in skill level, try your absolute best comp, tell them to try something that they're not comfortable with and see what happens. You'd be surprised what can happen sometimes.
Yeah. I think having that clear communication between both the coaches will set you up for a very, very successful experience, and it'll limit a lot of those, negative factors that might come in if it's just students that are setting things up and running wild and doing whatever they want. So yeah, I think overall scrimmages are the best way to get good practice. You can control that environment. You can work on things that you might not be as strong in, or try something new that you've never done before. And if you can do it, and if you can set it up, that is the best way to get the closest experience to what an actual game would be like. For some coaches who might not know how to set up a scrimmage, really it's just getting in touch with the programs either in your area, or I would suggest in your time zone at least, to help with scheduling purposes. It gets really tough when you have a school on the East Coast that wants to scrimmage a school on the West Coast, and it's 10 p.m. in one place and 6 p.m. in the other.
Can I just interject once?
Yeah.
I am terrible with time zones, and my team has accidentally played at 9 p.m. Because I am so bad at time zones, which for those of you, I'm a high school, so we had to get special permission to get into the building. But yeah, time zones are a thing.
So, things like Discord, if you have a statewide organization like in Iowa, or you have a conference like, the Great Lakes Conference is set up, those are easy connections that you can make. A lot of times those Discords will have channels dedicated to finding scrimmages. And then, one thing from personal experience that I would definitely say is have a couple of schools that you can rely on if something falls through. When I was coaching, our League of Legends team matched up really well against a school down in Missouri. The head coach was a good friend of mine, and if we needed a scrimmage last minute or we had some changes, I would just text Michael and say, hey, I had something fall through. What's your team doing tonight? Could you be a backup? Could you fill in? Because we still wanted to have that scrimmage happen, but if for one reason or another the school that had made that commitment couldn't get there, life happens, student gets sick, can't get off work, there's a test or something at a weird hour. If you're a college, sometimes you have night classes to juggle around or things like that. Having a school or a couple of schools that you can rely on that are good backups would be something that I definitely would recommend, kind of building those relationships up. And then you can kind of have those rivalries that Chaylin was talking about. Like, you start to recognize the other players and build that camaraderie in that community. Let's kind of switch gears here to the last thing on the list as far as this slide goes and talk a little bit more about film and VOD review. It's been mentioned a little bit about the importance of it, but I want to go kind of through the nuts and bolts of how you actually run a VOD review. So I'll just open this up to anybody who wants to jump in here right away. But can you actually talk about, okay, we load up this VOD and then do what?
I think for us as a whole, I think it's super important that once again, I'm and so are my coaches just very rigorous note takers. So as the match is being played live, I'm taking notes and I have timestamps for everything. If you are new to it, that's a huge thing, is having timestamps. And the other thing that I always recommend too is audio recording software for the comms. And that's super important too, because you might watch a team fight and be like, man, what the heck happened? And then they're like, oh, well, we were calling this person to dive in and do it. And then you listen to comms and it's just crickets, right? And nobody said anything. So that's super important. I think those are the first two. And then, we at Tiffin, we have a big projector that we have students sit around. And then we also have a separate VOD review station as well, just for VOD reviews. That's its own separate entity. And I think it's very important for you just to sit down and go very slow and now to people like, listen, VOD reviews are not fun. Like nobody comes in there like, yes, VOD reviews today. That's my favorite thing. But they're necessary. They are absolutely necessary for a successful program to win. And, if you look at professional teams, they will tell you they have 3-4 hour VOD sessions for one match. And I mean, like I said, it's awful. Nobody enjoys it, but you have to do it. You have to be able to see it from an outside perspective, because as you're playing, you're so focused on yourself, your role, what you need to do to succeed, but you don't look at it from somebody else's perspective. So then when you can look at it and say, oh, this is what my jungler saw, that makes sense why he didn't gank, because he didn't know this and this, because I didn't communicate that. The next time the situation comes around, you know that you have to communicate it that way. So yeah, we'll sit down, we'll watch it together, we'll go very slow. We'll actually have people chime in, what happened here? Why didn't we do this? And a lot of times I think the last important thing is to always give your students the opportunity to explain themselves. Don't just say, you should do this. It should be, why did you do this? Allow them to explain themselves. And who knows, maybe you could be, oh, I guess that makes sense. It wasn't right, but that makes sense. That's logical thinking. And then other times you might just be like, well, that didn't really make a whole lot of sense. Let's fix it and go this route. So, I mean, that's how we've done things, and we've been pretty successful with it.
And just to kind of chime in on that, I definitely feel that if you can get the audio, that is so important, because exactly how he just described it is what happens too often, where it's like, oh, well, I called this out, I said this, or blah, blah, blah. And then it ends up being kind of a match between, players on like, well, I said it, well, I didn't hear you say it, so on and so forth. But then you go back, you hear the audio, and then it's like, you didn't say what you said, or maybe someone really just didn't hear. And it's one of those situations where sometimes, you kind of need that extra push to really show that, hey, maybe you thought you said something, but like those call outs should have been made, and so on and so forth. And again, I think like if you can record the match, especially if you have like, again, I'm gonna use Overwatch again. So like with the actual replay system there that gives you the full like bird's eye view, you can really kind of break down each and every play. And if you have the audio going at the same time and you pause the audio and play the video and so on together, match it together, it's great. It's so good for getting the analysis that I feel like you really need when you're doing VODs to begin with. So
I'll say the last thing too to add is that when you're working with students on VODs, make sure, because this will happen, make sure that people aren't accusatory in the way that they talk to each other. Oh, you should have done this. Let the coach as a whole facilitate and moderate the discussion, because then it immediately just becomes a back and forth of, you should have done this. Well, you should have done this. If you did this, I could have done this. And that's not what you want, because that's not a healthy review. Allow people, give them opportunities to talk, and, let that go from there. Otherwise, it will turn into a mess quickly.
I think one of the other things that it's important when you're doing a VOD review is to focus on the positives too. don't have it just be about what you did wrong or the negatives or things that you need to work on. Highlight the things that were successful and that you should, focus on and say, hey, this worked really, really well. This is something that we need to replicate and emulate the next time we play. I think I've been in some very negative VOD sessions where it's just been 2.5 hours of like, man, we really messed up. And that deflates a team for sure the day, if not, more time after that practice session's over. So if you can also point out the things that you were doing right and the things that went well and that you can do again, I think that will overall kind of lift the mood of the VOD session and also keep your players in a more positive mental space to where they're more willing to point out when they made the mistakes themselves. And having that be a shared experience of not only the coach, but also the players, and having them take ownership in each of their roles, I think is a really positive way to make a VOD session more productive and making sure that the team is more focused moving forward.
One thing that I would like to mention, sorry, Ali, about some PCs aren't able to run recording software and play the game at the same time. We had a running joke last year with one of our PCs that we used that they were playing Minecraft while we were playing Overwatch because it was just really low quality, and that computer could not run OBS in the background. It never would have a shot at it, but there are shadow programs, like I know NVIDIA has, I think it's called like Shadow Play or something like that, that you can use to record at least gameplay, I know that much, possibly audio as well. Those are very useful if you're in a very limited situation with how good the computer is running.
I was also going to bring that up. We don't have the greatest equipment in the world, so we can't run recording softwares on the computers that the students are playing on. So we have a spectator in our matches for the most part. And for my high school people out there, this is when my streamers get to practice their thing as well. So the people who think that they want to be my shoutcasters, they get to practice recording videos, and I'll let them record their audio as well so they can kind of give what they would be shoutcasting if they were doing this match live as well. And sometimes we have to shut off that audio because it's not helpful at all. But it does give you a good picture of things. And so it kind of gives you two different conversations you can have, one with that shoutcaster and then one with the team. And as cliche as it is, starting with the good, that compliment sandwich, right? Start with the good. What things did we do well? Instead of saying what we did wrong, we usually go with what could we do better? And then kind of ending with what did you do well? And so like you get to talk about what I did well, what we need to do better as a team, and then you have to give a compliment to somebody else to kind of end out that VOD session. Tends to be a little bit more positive. And then we do not do that during our regular practice time after school because it's so limited. I get to pull my kids in during the day. We have this like flexible scheduling time. So I can pull my students in during that flex time to go over VODs once a week. No more than that, only once a week. But
awesome.
Enough.
We had a question come in. Joe asked, do any of you use CraigBot for recording Discord audio? If so, do you think it's an effective tool for high school esports? I've actually used CraigBot before. It works okay. What an even simpler thing that we used when I was at Jamestown, I just opened up the Microsoft Game Bar. It's just Windows G on a Windows device if you have it enabled, and you can record your screen and your audio with just that one application. It's super simple. It spits out an MP4, an MP4 at the end of it, and I would just upload it to like a YouTube channel or have it downloaded on a hard drive or something to bring to a different computer, or even just use it, from that same computer that we recorded on. So CraigBot does work, but I would say that there's other stuff out there too. Just kind of depends on what you're set up for and what software is allowed on your devices. Anybody else want to chime in on that? Okay.
Oh, there we go. I think CraigBot's fine. I mean, I think there's, as Josh said, I think there's probably better options out there. But I mean, at the end of the day, you're recording audio and video, so kind of whatever works. I mean, in our early days, you know, in some of the other teams I've been a part of, we've just put a standalone microphone on the table and just had a laptop connected to it and just hit record. And then you just see when the game starts, and when you start the audio, it's a lot harder and it's a lot more work. But when we needed to record comms for Halo 2 back in 2003, 4, something along those lines, that's how we did it. You know, what we were calling out was truthful. And believe me, we had to use game capture devices that were much worse than what we have now. So there's a lot of options out there, but sometimes going old school is the answer until you can figure it out.
Awesome. With that, let's touch on some COVID considerations for practice, because I know that's definitely at the forefront, especially for this fall semester. I'm just going to kind of open it up to anybody that wants to go through some, or you know, it doesn't have to be all of the topics on the screen here, but you know, to deal with not our normal circumstances, you know, how has that impacted your scheduling? Do you have different policies in place for social distancing or spacing out equipment, any cleaning protocols or anything like that? Other things to consider for running a practice during COVID-19?
Oh, I could talk on this topic for 10 years. We've had 100 meetings, all with different varying levels of this is what we're doing. You know, I think probably within the last 2 months, we've probably changed protocol 15 times. And that's going to happen. For us, you know, I kind of knew what we were doing straight away, just because I just followed it from the beginning, right? We took all of our computers. We're blessed. We have a great, massive, huge space. We took all of our tables. We basically had originally 2 computers per large desk table so they could sit next to each other, moved those to 1 each, spaced them 6 feet apart. We operate under the idea of half occupancy. So as long as our building is at half occupancy or less, we're good. We have a large building, so that's really never been an issue. And then at the end of every practice, I just have massive bottles of isopropyl alcohol. And we put them on microfiber cloths and we wipe down everything. We wipe down mice, we wipe down keyboards, we wipe down headsets. We do that before and after every single practice. For anyone to enter the arena, they have to get in touch with me. So we have a group me set up for our players. I take everyone's temperature before they enter the arena. And then we also have a tray set up on our campus. So anytime you enter a campus building, we have a Tiffany University mobile app. You get the QR code, you boop in, and then they know where you've been. That way, if something were to happen where you do test positive, they can say, okay, today he was at this spot, this spot, this spot, this spot. Who else was there at those times? And then they're able to set up into the quarantine housing that we have in place. So we have both quarantine housing and a couple of different options. We've also stated as a university that, you know, if a student is able to and they do test positive, they'll just be sent home for the 10-day period until they can come back. I think it's 10 days, maybe 14. But if they're close enough to do that, otherwise we do have specific housing set up for them to go into during that time period. But we're very strict on it, and it's very tough because our team loves to high five and hug and fist bump. And we had a kid who's all about it, and I'd be like, hey, you can't do it. And it physically just broke his heart, man. He's a hugger. He loves, like, we won. Yeah, man. And you couldn't do it. So we're pretty strict on that stuff. You know, we have to be face masks at all times. Since we are 6 feet apart, when they are seated at their computers, they don't need a face mask unless, of course, a coach comes up, wants to work with them, both wear face masks. And then we're pretty much wearing them all the time anyway. So that's definitely the route that we've taken. And then we just do deep cleans at the end of every week.
For us, I think we've kind of taken a little bit different approach, and actually this semester, in terms of the equipment our players have at home is a lot different than what it's been in the past. So we've actually decided for the foreseeable future, for the safety of our players and their families and so on, that as long as they have the means and the capability to compete and play from home, I mean, all of our practices right now are scheduled. Like we scheduled all, we pretty much have it all through Discord. Our meetings are through Discord. And again, we have our Discord divided between the teams and so on. So they can go into the voice chat channels that they need to and so on. And they have set times that they compete or they practice and compete. And for the most part, it's not the ideal scenario, but we feel that it's the safest for those players, yet they still have that opportunity to compete in their respective games, as it were. As we feel it's going to get, safer and whatnot, because still a little unpredictable, I think, right now. We already have plans in place very similar to what Chalen just described. So.
Quick question that came through before Allie, you jump in here. How do you deep clean your equipment, Chalen?
Isopropyl alcohol is the answer. As strict as you want to get with it, you can get high grade isopropyl alcohol. So we're actually ordering it by, we could have ordered it by the barrel, but I didn't need that much. So we actually have a 10-gallon jug, and it's going to be here soon. Otherwise, you can just get it from Walmart, whatever. But we get 99%, and then you just dilute it down to whatever you need. Usually like 92% is good. I do caution you, it is alcohol. I mean, it will eat away at your equipment at some point, years down the road, but we use microfiber cloth. I mean, we fully wipe everything down. In terms of the deep clean, our university bought, it's almost like a smoker, I guess, but it puts a liquid in there and it mists everything down. They do all of that. We obviously cover everything if we need to, and then we isopropyl alcohol down all the electronics, the computers included, all the surfaces that any of the students would touch, the chairs, all that kind of stuff. And then we have housekeeping as well, and they're just rock stars, man. They bust their butts all the time to make sure that we have everything we need, and they do a stellar job for us. So all those things are pretty important. And then we have in our arena, we do have 3 large-scale hand sanitizing stations as well. So, while we do deep clean, a lot of it is preventative measures too.
Allie, Gavin, you guys want to jump in here at all?
I mean, the only thing that I'm going to add to that is it's really different at the high school, and it's really different state by state. I'm in a Discord with a lot of other states, and it does seem like what we have to do is very different than what other places have to do. So, follow your regular school guidelines and do the best you can. One of the things that we've kind of had to admit is if we have to go, so we're 50% on campus at any time, but if we ever have to go fully online, we're going to lose some kids, and we just kind of have to admit that that's going to happen as we kind of transition to that. So that's all I have to add.
Yeah.
I will say on the college level, it's kind of tough. I know there have been some recent, I don't want to use the word scandals, but, leagues where people have been competing strictly online and using COVID as the excuse, and then having players that don't attend their university actually competing for them. And I know that has happened at the high school level as well. So figuring out a way around that is going to be tough. Aside from face cams, and even then, people will find a way around it. So you got to do your best.
As someone who's going to a school that's kind of notorious in the area for just kind of following other people's leads, we've received very little information. This is our first week, and there was a lot of bits and pieces that no one was getting connected until like the first day of school as to what was happening. We just this week got it actually finalized that we were even going to be able to have after school clubs. So when it comes to esports, it's just been kind of, we haven't been able to plan anything because you don't know what the next move is going to be. And having to face that is very annoying when it comes to trying to figure out when we're going to do practices. Because last year that was a big thing with practices. Was personally, I was working around 30 hours a week last year, and during the school year, and trying to fit that into cross country as well as esports, it was a mess. And we have such a small team, so missing one person is a bad thing for the team. We didn't just have a sub we could plug in at the time. So moving for Corona now, all of us are working less because of Corona. So it's opened up our schedules a good bit to where if we want a 5-stack in practice, we can plan those actually a lot easier this year, because all of us do this year have PCs that we can play from home. And actually last year we actually had to bring those in. So possibly this year cleaning measures might be just similar to what Jalen was saying, except for we might not be able to go that in depth with it.
Yeah, I think the important thing to remember is that there's not a right or a wrong, or there's not a one-size-fits-all model for our schools, and following your guidelines, doing as much preventative work as you can, and then just, staying on top of things as we move forward. Hopefully things get better soon, but for right now, we have to do what we can, and make sure that the safety and health of our students and our athletes is at the top of the board. So thanks everybody for sharing that. And the last thing here, let's just briefly touch on tryouts. This is going to be kind of more of a question, I think, for Jalen and Allie. But, can you guys talk on the metrics that you use in determining your starters? How do you, decide from a pool of, at some high schools, there might be 50 kids that play League of Legends. How do you decide the 5 that are going to be on your varsity?
For us, we do what we call our boot camp. The first 2 weeks of every school year, we take all the kids that want to compete in a specific game, and I'll just say, all right, you 5 play. I'll watch them play, and I'll have everybody else sit with me. And we sit and we watch all 5 of them in the spotlight. And, I'll say, all right, if you're trying to play AD, you watch the AD. And then I'll just go by bits and pieces. I'll say, all right, what did he do there? Was that the right or wrong play? And then they'll answer me, and they'll be like, was I right? I'll be like, I don't know. Were you? And then I take notes. I think the biggest thing is it's always going to be subjective. There are some schools that say, oh, you have to be, diamond or plat or masters, whatever. That's just such a skewed metric to me, and I would never encourage that. Your solo queue rank versus your ability to play with other people is just so vastly, unbelievably different. There are play styles in solo queue that you would consider greedy, but they work in solo queue because you have to be greedy sometimes. In a team-based environment, that would never work. It would never, ever work. So you have to understand that there's a difference in play style. And I can tell you right now, we have people on our team that maybe aren't the best skilled player, but they're an in-game leader. They communicate, they shot call, they listen to the coach. I will put that player in 10 times out of 10 over somebody who's absolutely crushing it, but they're not that great of a teammate. They don't listen. They want to play their specific play style. So we're very heavily on that. We give that those 2 weeks, then we go from there. But I tell people, even if you don't make varsity, if somebody has bad grades, they're out, right? Until they get those grades back in. We have that next man up philosophy, next woman up too. Same thing. Like, you have to just be able to step into the shoes. And we've done a really nice job of that as of late. And I'm definitely proud of our team for that.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing, you say it's your 2-week boot camp, and that's about how long tryouts take for us too. Tryouts just take time, because it is so much about how do you play as a team. And for us, I want to see as many different combinations of teams as I can possibly roll out in the amount of time that we have. And I'm also not looking for the best player or the best person specifically at that role. I'm looking for the people who are working together the best, because it's my philosophy that a team full of mediocre players can beat a group of people with one good player. So if they are working together as well as they need to, that's what I'm looking for. So we have what I like to call blind tryouts to start off with, which is where I'm not watching any screens. I'm only listening. And so that's kind of where our first phase kind of gets cut down. And then from there, just like you, I take a lot of notes. So I'm taking notes as we go through. And then I'm like, okay, tomorrow I want to try these people in a lineup. Okay. And I want to try these ones, and I want to look at these ones. And then we're just constantly shuffling. And then once we get to a varsity, then we can set our JV. And then we kind of have that swirling massive community underneath that.
Awesome. Gavin, Brad, anything to kind of jump in as well on kind of the metrics for what happens during tryouts, or, Gavin, for you, with you guys with a smaller team, might not have to worry about tryouts, but any thoughts there from you guys?
I will say, I feel like, as well as evaluating, again, player skill, how they work together as a team, so on, I feel like an important part as well is sometimes I feel like you just have to have that one-on-one. Again, kind of how Chalon was describing earlier, where it's like he'll put the groups together like, AD and so on, and kind of, assess and talk to them and so on. I feel like it helps to sit down with that player, like, especially if they're new. Like, if they've been in the program for a little while, then it's kind of like you might know already how they mesh with other players and so on. But especially new players, I feel like it's important that you really get to know, like, what is their personality? Are they quiet? Like, maybe they're good, but they hate making call outs. Well, that's something that, might be very detrimental to the rest of their team. Like, if they're quiet and they're not making the calls they need to, it could be bad in the long run, especially if they are unable to get past that over time. Because I've literally had players where they were great, but they just never spoke, like, just completely quiet day in and day out. Super nice people, but it is what it is. So it's one of those things where I do feel like you should always have that one-on-one, even though, or not just assess based on mechanics and so on, but really kind of get to know that person and how you can kind of figure out how you're going to mold them onto your team, or if they're moldable at all. So.
And if it's possible, I encourage coaches to sometimes sub in and play with your team. I've played league at a pretty high rank, and so every once in a while I will just hop in and I'll say, all right, grab a seat. I'm going to play this role. I'm going to shot call. Here's how we're going to do it. And I've had students ask me, they're like, well, how do you shot call? And I'm like, listen, I don't care if you're right or wrong. I just care that we make a decision, because once the decision is made, we can talk about it afterwards. I don't expect you to be perfect. You're coming to school to play esports. You're not a professional. I expect you to make mistakes. Where I will be upset is if we take 10 seconds to make that decision. Decision needs to be instant. And he said, well, how do you shot call? I go, you be louder than everyone else. And he's like, well, what if somebody else has a decision? I go, doesn't matter. They can't hear him. And he's like, oh, yeah, I guess that does make a lot of sense. So I've progressively taught my team, sometimes you do have to be that lead by example. Sometimes you have to give them the tools. And it just kind of depends. You have to just see what fits best for your team.
I kind of do the opposite. I'll hop in on a computer and we call it lead Miss V. And so I'll say nothing and they have to tell me what to do. So if I'm hopping out on Overwatch, I'll hop in as like a tank or something where they have to be very directive and they have to call out and tell me which direction to go and get them chatting. Usually that one comes in when we've just had like an absolutely silent practice and I'm not sure why everybody's super quiet. So I'll hop in and be like, okay, so I have no idea what I'm doing. So everybody's going to have to tell me what to do. So let's call this out and make it happen. And it gets people laughing, especially with the kids. We kind of have sometimes we have a rough day, or I don't know, but it gets us laughing and playing together a little bit. And we start shouting things out and, they start talking again. And then I'll hop back out, say, okay, let's try this again. And this time keep that level of talking up. So yeah, even if you're not good at the game, it can be made to work.
That is a huge thing when it comes to call-outs and important to the game. I come from playing a lot of Valorant and CS, where call-outs are a mandatory part of the game. That's one of the things that hinders solo queue so much, is that you can't solo queue because there's no one doing call-outs. There's no one on comms. Dead comms will kill a team, and that's a thing that you need to build. And I joined last year specifically for helping my esports program at my school for Overwatch. I had never played, I maybe had like 5 hours in Overwatch, but I was an extremely talkative player who constantly was calling out things. And I got hooked into it pretty quick and got up there pretty fast, but I kind of beat out someone for fifth person or sixth person, however many people Overwatch has, for just that last spot, because I was able to make the call outs. I was a fast moving DPS who was able to get in there and get in the nitty gritty and was able to keep making call outs very fast. And that just comes with, you have to have a base level of confidence. And if you can instill that in your students, you're a completely different otherworldly coach. That's an amazing quality to have as a coach. And I urge any coach who's struggling with that, struggling to be a leader, just pick up some HR management videos and look at some of their examples as to how to do leadership, because personally, that's what I'm looking into as a career. And if you can figure out how to be an in-game leader, that can completely change a team.
Awesome. Last thing before we get to like the wrap up and the Q&A, let's talk about the other roles on the team, specifically those that aren't your starting five. How is their practice different, or how do you get them to participate when it's somebody on a JV or a sub for your varsity, or your student analysts or the student coaches, the players that maybe they're not even playing the game during practice, but they still have a role within your program. Do any of you have some experience in kind of how you guys navigate those practices with those students?
Yeah, I mean, for us, we treat everybody the exact same. I tell everybody, whether you're my best player or my worst player, you're gonna get time with a coach. You're gonna get time to work on things. Now, our only difference is that obviously when it comes down to Saturdays, the varsity players are gonna be the ones competing. If we have enough people for a full JV team, and so do they, then we'll schedule something during the week. Absolutely. But in terms of practices, we try and keep it the exact same because we've always viewed everybody as equals on the team. Now, with that being said, there'll be times where I might grab a JV player and say, hey, instead of practicing today, I want you to stand with me the whole practice, and you and I are just going to talk. And we're going to sit behind them. We're going to have them play. And I'm going to say, hey, sometimes I'll just give a quiz. What did that player do there? Can you explain it to me? And it could be a good thing. It could be a bad thing. Why did that work? Why didn't it work? What should they have done differently? And you'd be surprised at how often they can come up with the correct answer. Sometimes it takes a little prodding. Sometimes it takes a little poking. And sometimes there just takes time to think about it. And that's the issue, right? Is that it takes too long. As you progressively work with them more and more, they might get it. And then every once in a while too, I'll purposely grab somebody and just have the JV player sub in, because you'd be surprised with playing with better people, how quickly you can elevate your own gameplay because you hold yourself to that higher standard. Sometimes when you're on maybe the secondary team, you're like, oh, this is good enough. But then you play with the varsity team and you say, man, I want these guys to know that I'm good. I need to show them. I need to really zone in here. So yeah, we do things like that. And I think it's really helped. We have, I think we have like 11 people on our Overwatch team. And I think we have like 11 or 12 for Counter-Strike. So when I say, we have that opportunity, it's there. And then usually once a week we do inter-squad scrimmages. So we'll just have varsity and JV play. Sometimes we'll mix it up. Sometimes the coaches will step in, let them know we still got it. But I think that's really important because you want everybody to still feel like you're part of the same team, right? Whether you're varsity or JV, you're still Overwatch, right? You guys are still the same people. And when they're supporting the team on Saturday, that Lucio main who's also on JV might come to the varsity player and be like, hey, man, you messed up this wall ride. Let's work on that, right? And then back and forth, because just because you're an overall better skilled person doesn't mean you're better in every aspect of that role. You can always learn something from somebody.
Anybody else want to jump in and talk? I know, Allie, you said that you have your casters practice during practice. Kind of what's that experience been like for them?
Yeah, so I have my casters cast during practice. Like I've kind of said before, I'm really blessed with administrative support. So I even have TAs during the day, so they get to do all of, they'll watch the videos and take notes as well. And those are typically my captains of my teams. So that's really helpful. But I mean, yeah, my biggest one of not players is casters. But I try to have my varsity, my JV, and my community teams practicing all at the same time. Just so that way those community teams can like feel the varsity and kind of maybe that's a thing that they could aspire to or conversations that they could have. And when we have those turnaround conversations, they listen in on those and can hear those conversations. So yeah, just I find keeping them in the same space helps a lot. Now, what that's going to look like with COVID, I'm not 100% sure, but you know, we're trying. It's gonna be great.
Awesome. Brad, anything to add before we go to Q&A?
Actually, I was gonna mention a little bit of like with student coaches, for example. I'm actually I'm a huge fan of player as a previous player myself for Overwatch and so on other games, as I mentioned before. I'm a huge fan of players kind of growing together and in a sense kind of like teaching themselves, like learning yourself, because I feel like it puts responsibility like on you. It makes you, it's like you create and grow your own future, you know? Like I feel like with having student coaches, it's like that peer teaching almost. It's like, for example, you take a player who in say Overwatch or Rocket League or something, you know, master player in this case, like with Overwatch, you have him lead or her lead, say like a VOD review, or they actually sit there and show their fellow players. Cause you know, sometimes even though we're not that old, like our students or our players sometimes are just like, oh, you know, old people, like they don't know what they're talking about. So, I mean, I feel like there's points where it's like having those student coaches is just it's such a powerful motivator, because even then, especially for new players first coming into the program, they see those positions and they're just like, oh, you know, like I'm pretty good at this game. I feel like I could be in that position of leadership to help my team and so on and so forth. So, as far as like student coaches or even like team captains and so on, like I'm always a huge fan of implementing those types of things into our teams, just because I feel like there's always something that we as like coaches or directors or head coaches or whatever, there's always things that we can teach for sure. But I also feel like there's so much that players are going to learn like one-on-one with their peers, and whether it's, you know, student coach or player, so on. I feel like that's such an important thing to have in the dynamic.
Just to kind of tack onto that, I'm a teacher by day, so a little bit of teaching. You know, there's no learning without reflection. And the best way to do that reflection is to verbalize it. And so having those student coaches, even if it's just somebody that they can have a quick conversation with, or somebody that they can turn and talk to, if it's a JV member watching over their shoulder for that match, and then they can turn around and be like, what happened? You know, they can have that conversation as well, which I think is really powerful.
Something that I want to urge any coach to reach out to is see who your players know. As someone who, like I said before, I'm a marketing manager for a separate esports team that's completely separate from my high school. But you can guarantee if we get some VOD review chances with that team, you can guarantee I'm going to show some of those videos from our Valorant team to them and see what their thoughts are. And reaching out to other people that your students know for help, whether it's just joining into a Discord call, or if it's something like this year we're having a graduate from last year come back as a assistant coach. He's like a plat player in Valorant and he's really good. He's going to come back and help because he's friends with us and he knows, hey, they need some help, and the school okayed it for him to come back during Corona stuff. So hopefully that works out well. Stuff like that is always a good thing to utilize, and see who your players know, whether they know. I mean, there's one guy in the Valorant team that I was talking about that he's like an immortal player. That's some of the highest level of Valorant play that you can get. That's someone that you're going to want to have do VOD reviews, and that's just one person. You can, if you have a whole team of people, who knows who they know in the community.
Awesome. And that brings us to the end. So we'll do a open forum Q&A. If you have questions that didn't get answered over the last hour and a half, feel free to shoot them in the Q&A or in the chat right now. We'll try and get to them here. Thanks again to everybody that attended, and a special thank you to the 4 of our panelists. It was great having you all here this evening and participating. Really a lot of great insight and a lot of great knowledge being passed around. So thank you for that. And again, if there's any questions, please feel free to submit them now before we wrap up. And maybe while we're waiting to see if any come in, if you guys just want to take turns with some closing thoughts or just anything that you want to mention that we might not have gotten to tonight.
I do have one really quick one. We're kind of an older program when it comes to high school. So as I'm talking through some of kind of these things, if you're really new to this and you're new to the esports scene, I just really encourage you, don't compare your chapter 1 to like my chapter 20, right? Like we started in my classroom with like the oldest computers in the world. We had to set up and tear down every single night. Like it was not ideal, but we did it. And that's how we started. So just, if you're not where we're at now, that's totally okay. Just however it is that you can get going, I would really encourage you to do that if you're here as kind of somebody who's new to the scene.
And to actually add on to that, I think that's really funny because same thing, like with how our program started, again, when I was a student, it like we pretty much took like the big library, desk, like the study desk that they have in the library where it like blocks everything. And those were our computer, like how we actually competed and so on and so forth. So it's like, it's going to get there eventually. You just have to be persistent and keep doing your thing and like, just stay positive. It's going to be rough sometimes, but it's going to be good too once you get there.
So we did have a question come in from Nathan. Our school used fluid rosters last season where varsity and JV rosters could change each week based on a variety of different factors. It sounded good on paper. In practice, it was mixed results. How do you feel about having flexible rosters and how you can navigate that type of a scenario?
We also attempted flexible rosters. I know Nate is a high school teacher. Sorry, that's why I jumped in. We also attempted flexible rosters as well and found that it could hurt the team dynamic a little bit, but it also kept people on their toes. So again, those mixed results, you kind of have to be weary of, but I would strongly suggest that if you're going to change your roster, don't change it the night of the game or the night of the match. Try and change it maybe like the week before. So this is next week's roster. So going into next week's practices, this team is all going to practice together and then they're going to compete, or however else you want to try and do that. Just give yourself some more lead time, because I do like having those flexible rosters does kind of keep people on their toes, which is nice.
I mean, for us, we've always lived by the mantra of, the best player for the situation is going to play. I don't think there should ever be a stance where somebody is untouchable on a roster. Everybody, and it sounds bad, but everyone is replaceable. If you have a student who started off super hot and then all of a sudden, they got things going on in their personal lives and they're not dedicating as much time and they start slacking, that spot's up for grabs. And I think to Nathan's point, you can't just be swapping people every week. You're never going to develop any team chemistry. Your team is going to be on pins and needles. They're going to be walking on eggshells. If they miss that hook, gosh, that's it. I'm on JV now. Like you don't want that. That is absolutely something that is horrendous and will absolutely tear a team down. But on the flip side, you can't let somebody know or think that regardless of how I play, I'm here to stay because I'm the man, I'm the woman, I'm the best. Nobody can touch me. You can't have that. That's just not a good mentality. So fluid rosters, can work as long as you're maybe having a check, if you will, every certain amount of time.
I would say fluid like molasses.
Perfect. It doesn't look like we've had any other questions come in. So Gavin, Jalen, do you guys want to just kind of give some closing thoughts and we'll wrap up?
One quick thing that I did have an actual question about for all of you guys is how do you guys, when it comes to your varsity level players, I guess would be the best way for you guys, is how do you guys get together your teams for practices, making sure schedules align? Because as someone who every week my work schedule is what I make it to be, so I can call in ahead of time and be like, hey, I'm available these hours this week. I want to work these hours. But I don't know, I can't do that on a short moment's notice to where it can align every week with someone else's schedule or for daily practices. I just can't do that. How do you guys get around dealing with schedules like that to where you have to work around specific players for a varsity team for maybe just wanting that team chemistry, practicing with that, because you do need practice with that.
I mean, I'll let Allie handle high school. For college, I mean, the way I would look at it, Gavin, is, you know, if you come to Tiffin University and you're on scholarship for me, that is your job. I'm paying you to be on my team. I'm paying you to come and compete for me. And we tell our students that it goes school and then esports, right? Like it sounds rigid and tough, but I can't have a kid tell me, oh, my mom's coming up to visit on a Tuesday for lunch. I'm not going to be at practice. I mean, that I can't have that, because you're going to eventually start running into issues where you have to make judgment calls every other week because, you know, somebody's girlfriend's going to come up, but somebody's best friend is going to come up. Can they skip for lunch? You know, hey, this and that. We're big on communication. Obviously, if something tragic happens, you're going to miss. That's going to happen. That will happen. Absolutely. But if, you know, if somebody has to work and they have to do that to afford school, we have students that, you know, they get done with practice at 7:30 and they go work at a fast food restaurant from 8 to 12. And that's something that, you know, they are absolutely, you know, busting their butt to do everything they can to afford school and compete. And sometimes that's what you have to do. But we are pretty strict on making that happen. And for the most part, our admissions counselors are pretty well knowledged on what our practice times are. So when you do schedule your freshman year, you're going to get hosed regardless of what happens. You're low man on the totem pole. You're not getting any of the good times that you want. But as you progress through your sophomore, junior, and senior years, you'll be able to start saying, you know, oh, I want, you know, I have a choice for my math class to either be at 3 p.m. when I have practice or 11 a.m. You know, you're going to choose that time that's not slated for that. So, you know, your freshman year, you will miss some classes. Josh alluded to it earlier. We have night classes, which I hate. It ruins everything. It always gets in the way. It's the worst thing possible, but you have to do it. And I will say, as the final point for this, you are a student athlete. You are a student first. I will always make room for you to go to class. And if you tell me, Coach, I'm struggling in this, is it cool if I miss a practice to catch up? There's never a time I'm going to tell you no. On the flip side, if you tell me, hey, forgot I had a paper due at midnight, is it cool if I miss practice? Nope, that one's on you. So, you know, you have some give and take, but when you come to college, you're an adult. You know, you have to know what's going to work for you and what's going to work best in the situation, but you have to be considerate of others as well.
And I guess from a high school perspective, I kind of talked about this at the very beginning. 2 weeks before the season starts, we kind of sit down and sketch out the schedule for the week, and that is what we stick to. And it's different for each level. For varsity, I win. This is the schedule. If you have work and you have to miss every single practice every single week because it's on Tuesday and you work every Tuesday, here is the JV team because our varsity needs to practice and they need to practice together. And so then for the JV team, you know, the commitment is I should win, you know, I should get you most of the time. We can have that conversation. And the community team is, you know, come and go as you please. You know, I don't really care how that goes down. But yeah, so it's different per level.
Awesome. Brad, anything on that?
Honestly, I pretty much completely agree, like in terms of like how you almost have to have that rigid structure, because it's like in the ideal scenario, it's like you could keep it like a more open and a little bit more fluid with having people meet, but it comes down to a point where it's like you have to make that decision to like, okay, this is the schedule, I need you here. Like, and exactly how he said, like, I mean, it's school first and then it's esports. Like, if I understand you need a job, like again, when I was a student, I did esports, I worked, and all in between. So it's like, I know, and like trying to balance all that stuff was really tough, but a lot of it is time management. It's like, you know, if you know what your schedule is going to be for esports, then like, that's where if you have a job, you tell your job, this is what I can do. If you really want to do esports, then this is what I can do. Because I think it ain't perfect, but a lot of times like all of us are like juggling, and it's tough to have that perfect schedule. So
Awesome. I don't think we've had any other questions come through. Jalen, anything that you want to add before we wrap up? I think you're the only one that hasn't gone yet.
I think the last thing I just want to say is, we appreciate Josh for giving us the opportunity to come out and speak about this. For any high school coaches that need help running your programs, have questions, whatever, the Esports Ohio Discord is absolutely incredible. Even if you're not a member, there's tons of questions you can ask in there. I linked my information there as well. If you guys have some questions about how to help your program, please ask. And as a side note, we're always recruiting. So if you guys have any high school students that are looking for a spot on a varsity or a JV collegiate roster, my contact information is there. I'm always willing to chat.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody. We really appreciate you taking almost 2 hours out of your Wednesday night to be a part of the session tonight. I think we kind of touched on it. The esports community, especially in the high school and college world, is really supportive and wants to move the sport forward, I think. So if you're looking for help in any area, it doesn't have to be just, how do you run a good practice like we talked about tonight. If you need help, ask for it, and someone, chances are, will be there to lend a hand. It's part of the reason why we started doing this platform with Bytespeed and creating Esports Ed in the first place, was to share information and to help people get started and get rolling. So thanks for attending. Thanks for being a part of our panel, and stay safe, everybody. We really appreciate you being here, and we'll see you next month.
Take it easy, everybody.